OpenText's webinar on Composer Notes for converting Lotus applications to .NET. This is Matt Brunquell, your host, and the objective today is to introduce you to the keys for migrating a Lotus Notes application over to .NET. And we'll do this by providing a quick intro on the capabilities and benefits of Composer Notes, which is the solution we'll use today to walk you through the conversion of a sample NSF. Now, for those of you new to Composer Technologies, we're a part of OpenText, which is the 10th largest enterprise software company in the world and the leader in enterprise information management. Composer Technologies is part of the application modernization business that offers a set of software solutions for modernizing Lotus Notes as well as Oracle Forms applications. So the Composer Notes solution has been out for over 10 years, and conversions can be delivered as a service, or the tool can be licensed with training and support. The diagram you see here shows how all aspects of an NSF are converted into the Microsoft stack. This includes the user interface, the business logic, the database, and associated documents as well, and the security. So with Composer Notes, you can migrate complex Lotus Notes applications to ASP.NET, and much of the conversion is automated with the tool, but there are some items that are not converted automatically, basically due to environmental differences between Lotus Notes and a three-tier .NET architecture. As part of the tool, there's an analyzer utility, which we use, that helps flag these differences so the time and effort to complete the migration of an NSF can be estimated. The generated application is a .NET application, and it's maintained and extended in Visual Studio. All the source code is provided as well for the converted app, so there are no runtime licensing dependencies. Now, the solution does not convert Notes apps to SharePoint. Some Notes applications are well suited to SharePoint, for example, the Nifty 50 template-based apps or simple forms which capture data. However, many customers find that their more complex Notes applications are not a good fit in SharePoint. These include Notes applications that have large data volumes, a lot of functionality coded in Formula or Lotus script agents, hides when functionality. There are some other characteristics as well, and if you're interested in that, we can always do a follow-up with you on those specific elements that have been identified. Composer Notes also does not convert applications that are web-based only in the Domino world. Often, though, what we find is the customer still has a Notes client version, and this can be migrated, but any web portions associated with it, so any JavaScript or Java sections in the app would still need to be rewritten or manually converted if those Java and JavaScript sections are still needed once the client app is converted over into a .NET web app. Now, we just went through kind of the capabilities of the solution at a high level, as well as what it doesn't do, but want to take a moment to kind of outline the key benefits of this solution. The solution converts the user interface, the business logic, the Notes database, document data, and ACL security. And this includes providing much of the underlying capabilities that the Lotus Notes framework provided. And customers have provided feedback that this saves them anywhere from 3x to 5x in a reduction in time and costs over their rewrite estimates. Now, in addition to producing clean .NET code, the file structure of the components and objects are organized much as they were in Lotus Notes. And this provides a reference point that both the original Notes developers and the .NET developers who may be maintaining and extending it moving forward can follow. And for the Lotus Notes developers, it also eases the learning curve into .NET. Customers also emphasize the benefit of maintaining the navigation for the initial conversion. That's the end user navigation through the app, in order to minimize the impact on the end users and avoid retraining. avoiding retraining can be a significant cost savings for your apps out there that have a lot of users. And then on the IT staff side, they've also found it's much more straightforward to test a conversion versus a rewrite to make sure all the functionality and behavior is present, as well as the data or data results. You know, the user acceptance testing is much less difficult and lower risk if you can compare the converted .NET app and data results directly with the original Notes application. Now this graphic illustrates the high-level steps in a conversion project. In particular, what that process looks like with the Composer Notes solution that we'll be showing you in a moment. And I won't go through all of this in detail, but for the analysis in the first step, there's that analyzer utility I mentioned, which helps to estimate the time and effort to complete the migration on an NSF. Note that the last step in the process is performance tuning, and that's actually a step that isn't required on every NSF in a project, and in some projects it's not required at all. But when it is required, it usually applies to a particular set of views or forms within an NSF. It's usually not needed on an entire NSF or every NSF in the project. The performance tuning on these subsets are done once the converted application's been converted and the functional testing is fairly complete that you see in those intermediate steps. The length of the time to convert an NSF can range on its complexity and the types of elements that have been used, but just to give you a flavor of, for one NSF, the range can be, you know, less than 2 weeks to up to 4 months we've seen on some very large, complex NSFs. So with that background, let's go ahead and go into the demonstration. And I'm going to introduce Brian Halstead here and turn control over to him for the demo. He's our senior principal engineer on the Composer Notes product, and I'll have him walk through the demo. And while I turn control over to him here, let me just give you a feel of what you're going to see in the demo. Here, let me make Brian the presenter. All right, Brian, you should be in control, but while he sets that up, kind of what you're going to see in the demo is we're going to convert a Lotus Notes application for your one NSF to an ASP.NET app. Now, it's not as large as some of your customer apps that you have, but it has the components and business logic, or the elements, if you will, that you would see in most complex Lotus apps. And so you'll see a navigation tree, you'll see hides winds functionality, you know, there's some agents in there, things like that. If we ran this through our analyzer utility, it would come up as a low intermediate complexity because of its size. But again, there's some typical elements you'll recognize as a Notes application owner. Now, what we're going to do is a full conversion of the UI, the business logic, the Notes database with the document data and ACL security. And Brian will show you, hey, you know, very briefly what the Notes app looks like, and then he'll run it through the conversion. And then after converting it, we'll deploy it so you can see that same functionality and navigation of the Notes client app now as a .NET browser-based app. And you'll see how that impact to the end users is minimized with this type of conversion. We'll also look at the converted code in Visual Studio so you can see how that project hierarchy and naming of the components is done, which makes it very easy to maintain and extend. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Halstead, and then once the demo is complete, we will open it up for questions and answers, and you should be able to do that through your go-to panel or dashboard. There'll be an area where you can post questions or chat. If you can, try and keep yourself to the questions area so we don't have to go back and forth between both the question and the chat section. But please do post your questions for us when during the demo, and then we'll go over them once the demo is complete. All right, take it away, Brian.
All right, thanks, Matt. As Matt had indicated, this is a training database that we use during our training course. It's rather simple to intermediate complexity and design. It's your typical kind of run-of-the-mill looking notes applications where typically you'd have an outline on the left that allows you to select various views to show document data, as well as having the actual document data over here on the right with an action bar at the top with various action buttons. If I open up one of these documents, this is the main form design for the main documents within this application. Within this particular form design, there's a tab table here with also a nested tab table. We have like section control, various field controls, drop-down lists, radio buttons, kind of your typical run-of-the-mill type fields, rich text field here with an attachment, as well as just a computed table down at the bottom with some computed fields in there as well. Again, there's also another action bar at the top, and this is just kind of the general form design for the main form within this application. With that being shown, I'll just go ahead and begin the conversion process to convert this NSF and all of this data over to an ASP.NET application, and the data will be housed within a SQL Server database. So to get that started, I'll need to create my database first within SQL Server. So I'm just going to create a new database here and call it demo. And I'm just going to accept the default options for what SQL Server is going to apply here for this database and just say OK. So with that being done, I can go over to Visual Studio. The import wizard or the conversion tool is a Visual Studio template project. So to start the conversion process, I would go to the new website, and then within the available templates, the Composer website is one of the templates that are available. So I'm going to go ahead and name the project here Demo, and then say OK. Now this brings up the import wizard, which guides you through the rest of the process to select the correct options and the NSF you want to convert, as well as connecting to the associated SQL Server or Oracle database that, as you saw, I just created a SQL Server database. So here I already have the training database selected. If I didn't, I can go ahead and browse and locate the NSF or NTF file that I want to convert. There's some various options that can be selected that control the conversion process. First of all, first one here is import data. If you have a very large NSF, say it's 50 gigabytes, then you probably don't want to import data at the end of the conversion because that could take many hours based on the amount of data that would have to be imported. We do have a separate utility that is specific for just importing data, and that can be reran as many times as necessary to refresh data or update data from a production environment. You do have the option too, if you have a large set of data, to import just the first records for each table. An important option here is to check all documents to find out missing fields. Within Notes, you can add fields on the fly to documents through code, either formula language or Lotus script, and those fields may not actually exist as part of the actual form design that's been defined, for that specific form. So if the NSF has data, it's important to check all of that data to find any of those fields that have been added dynamically through code that don't exist as part of the form design, so that they get included within the associated database form table, as well as within the C# class that gets generated that represents that document object. As I said, there's some various other options here that control how the date time is stored in the database, whether or not you want to use the master page across the entire application, normalizing multi-valued field data, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and just go next. And this is the database connection panel, where you have the option of SQL Server or Oracle. I'm currently using SQL Server. I already have the information plugged in here. The database I named is Demo, my local server. We do have the options for SQL Server to support full text indexing, as well as indexing of known attachment data, which would be like Word, Excel, text files, PDF, PowerPoints, anything that SQL Server can recognize as being an indexable attachment. And then all of that becomes searchable through our full text search bar that we've implemented within the running application. So go ahead and test my connection, and we're okay. And then as soon as I hit finish here, it's going to go typically pretty fast. So the status will be shown here in the lower left, status bar for Visual Studio, as far as the current process that is occurring while it's converting the application. So the first part is it has to generate the DXL from the NSF, and then it will analyze that DXL data, which is all the design data for the NSF. Then at this point, it's scanning the actual document data within the NSF to locate any of those dynamically added fields. There it goes to convert all of the business logic. Now it created all the database tables, and now it's importing the actual data. And it should be about done here in just a second. There. So this message here is indicating that certain constructs within typically Lotus script, sometimes formula language, could not be directly translated to C#, or they're possibly just not supported within the .NET environment. In those cases, we actually insert to-do comments within the converted code so that those areas can be quickly located as part of the conversion process after compilation issues have been addressed. So here's the converted ASP.NET application. All the design elements that came over from the NSF have been divided up within C# classes here as kind of like back-end classes, as well as the UI portion being converted to ASPX pages and ASPX user controls. Here within the AppCode folder, so we have the various elements like shared actions, agents, forms, script libraries, subforms, views. The typical structure for the main elements like forms, views, subforms get created in two major classes for each element. The first class is what we call the value class, or you could call it kind of the document or base document class. This class represents the actual document object that will be processed on the server, and within one of these classes, you will have all of the fields that were found through the scanning or defined as part of the form design, as well as various properties that describe those fields. So if I had a name type field, it's described here within the field attribute. The target here indicates the database table column that this field is going to connect to through our data layer within the runtime. The second major class is the manager class. This is where all of the business logic comes over from any coded portions that existed within that particular design element. So for in this case, within a form, this is where all the computed field function would be defined as far as, any of that formula language that defined that computed field, any hide when formulas, any action button logic, any button logic that exists within the form page itself, as well as any of the events that are defined within that form. So for instance, on that form, there was a query save that actually had commented data in it. There's also query open. So all of those form events are supported, and they will be processed accordingly. Obviously, this is Lotus script that came over from the associated event within that form. Typically, query open is a Lotus script event. And you can notice here that the code looks very similar to actual Lotus script code. I have a Node2i document, and that's retrieved to Node2i workspace, that current document. Those types of things. Our implementation, our runtime implementation framework follows all of the same guidelines that existed within the Domino Designer help. that describes how to use any at formulas as far as at functions and at commands, as well as Lotus script objects, the entire notes objects functionality. Again, as far as that would work within a .NET environment, there are certain aspects that do not convert over or that we've not implemented within the .NET environment because they make no sense within a .NET environment because they're very specific to Domino. An example of that is Domino administrative tasks. So there's like a whole set of classes that deal with that administration database on a Domino server, and there's no point in having that in a .NET environment because there's no more Domino server and there's no need for those administrative tasks. So with that being a quick overview of just kind of the converted code that came over and the general structure of the ASP.NET application, I'm going to go ahead and build this, except there is one compilation issue that's been engineered here. I said this is part of our training database. There's just an ambiguous reference right here. And so with that being fixed, I'll go ahead and actually just start up the application. It will build it right away. So this is just going to be started locally here on my computer within the ASP.NET development server. Obviously within a development or QA environment, these applications would need to be published to IIS and then tested by developers and by the end users through a user acceptance testing process. So here's the converted app. There may be some slight UI differences that can easily be cleaned up through the associated ASPX, ASPX, or even CSS associated within the application to make things appear even more like the original application. But just to go off of what the original application was, I have my outline on the left here. I can switch through various views. Here we have a categorized view with twisties, and we also have like a totals column over here. You'll see that all the colors come over and types of columns as well as the data. If I can head back to the main view here, we just have this kind of main flat view. Our action buttons came over. Some action buttons aren't being shown up here that were originally in the original view because they have hide wins attached to them that are associated with security levels. Currently, I do not have this connected to a security provider, so I don't really have a necessarily computed security level, so some of those buttons won't be showing up. If I go ahead and open up one of these documents, we can go ahead and see the form design that came over. This was that default kind of main form design that was used within this application. And we have our tab set here with our nested tab set. We have our section control that came over, all the various drop-down lists, radio buttons. We have our rich text field here with an attachment and a doc link. We do support the whole transition mode within forms from going from read mode to edit mode. So just like within notes, I can double click on here and this will move the form into edit mode. Once in edit mode, our rich text control is being displayed here with the attachment data. I could add more attachments or doc links or text here. Again, some UI changes need to be adjusted, like this field could be shortened up slightly. I said that usually that's typical to just clean up the UI. Hide when logic comes over. When I click on this radio button, it's causing a hide when to execute, which then just shows this drop-down list field. All the data came over for the drop-down list options from the original application. If I hit no again, it'll re-hide that. All updates to the form are done through Ajax except for the mode transitions, and pretty much everything within the Composer runtime is done by Ajax except for page transitions when you're moving from one page to another, or in a form transition when it's going from edit mode to read mode. Those are the only times that full postbacks occur. Otherwise, it's all done handled through Ajax. That's pretty much the form there in a nutshell. All prompts come over too as well. So we have all the system prompts. It's asking if I want to save changes. Say no. As far as options that were available originally within the Notes client, you have options here within the Create menu if you want to create forms or documents or compose documents from a certain form. In the Actions menu, this is where you have agents specified that you want to show up within the Actions menu. So within the converted application, we can't add those menus into IE as a normal menu bar. So what we've done instead is put them within a context menu. So here we have the Create menu. Here we have the Actions menu, which has those agents that were converted to show up in the Action menu, as well as some other options that were available via the Notes client, as well as some that we've added as just kind of general options that we found that people typically use. The primary one being the ability to export any view to a CSV or Excel file. So we just kind of built that in because it's kind of typical for customers to have some process already designed within Notes that allows exportation of data to typically Excel. We do have the option too, because you have this option from the Notes client to import data using a structured file like an Excel file or a CSV file. As long as it's been defined properly, we can actually import data and generate documents based off of a data file. We support like the preview mode. We do have search this view, which also brings up the full text search bar. And I said this will actually make use of the SQL Server full text indexing to not just search what's available, the data in this view, but actually go into the documents and their associated fields and find any text that matches the full text query, as well as any attachments that may be attached to the document that contain the text that is being searched for. Just to go over the database structure real quick. So within that demo database, every form table, or actually every form design within the NSF will get an associated form table generated for it. So for example, that main form, which was the FRM NJE that came from that training application, has a form here associated with that same name. If I look at the data within this table, you'll see that, first of all, we add a handful of system columns to each table just because the runtime needs to process commonalities between document objects. For example, there's always going to be an updated by, the notes ID column, which holds the document unique ID, that's standard, modified time, created time, conflicts, all of those things, those are the system columns. Otherwise, fields come over as defined columns within the associated form table. In reference to document unique IDs, we do maintain those IDs. So whatever that unique ID was for that specific document in Notes, it will have the same ID after conversion and migration into the database. Going forward, any new documents that are composed or generated will get an associated Notes ID generated for it as well that matches the same kind of format as the existing IDs. There are various system tables which get added to the associated database schema. And these are for handling various things that can be processed within the runtime and based on various settings within the runtime as well. Attachment data is stored in a separate table and linked back to the original document according to that unique ID as well as the associated field name, which is typically a rich text field, attachment name, and then there's actual binary or image data that's stored within this table, which represents the attachment. All attachment data is maintained and in its whole form and can easily be downloaded from the associated documents. So if I were to go back into this document and click on the attachment, it will cause a file download to happen, and I can just open that from the browser, and then it'll end up launching that Excel file as it originally was. There are various other tables here to, Composer Children that helps to keep track of document hierarchies between parent and child documents within Notes. Composer Folders to keep track of folders get generated on the fly in a virtual aspect. Composer Values, this is only used if you decide to normalize multi-valued field data. Then those associated field data will be normalized into this single table for the various form tables. Security, I can't really show security here because I'm not connected to an Active Directory provider at the moment, but security is maintained in all aspects from the associated NSF. So we do have the main ACL, the access control list that came from the NSF, and we have a mapping file here called the acl.xml, which can be mapped to an associated security provider like Active Directory. If I was a member of the developers group within Active Directory, then that would apply me to have editor access to this application, as well as being a part of the developer application role. We do support document level security as well as readers and authors fields. So all the rules that applied within Notes as far as how readers fields allow people to see or not see documents, and authors fields, again, allowing people to see documents and or edit them. All of that functionality is carried forward in the same way that it worked in Notes. So, Matt, I think that about covers it.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Well, what we'll do now, here I'm going to, for the moment, change back over to me, but depending on the questions we get, we may need to go back over to you in your demo. But what we'll do is we'll open it up for questions and answers now. And again, you can use the questions or the chat on your GoToMeeting panel, and we'll give you a second to post those, and we'll start going through them here in about 10 to 15 minutes, because I see a few have been posted already. All right, so we'll go ahead and start. There's a few questions that are in. The first one is, what versions of .NET are supported? And Brian, I'll let you answer that one.
So the current version of .NET that we are currently supporting is 4.0. We are in the process of upgrading, and we'll be serving or actually supporting .NET 4.6 very shortly.
Excellent. Okay. And then the next question, is there a cost involved to run the analyzer? So the answer to that is we actually, we being OpenText, run the analyzer, so we don't provide that out there as a utility for the customer to use because we have to we have to interpret the results, if you will. But we will run up to 20 of your NSFs through the analyzer at no charge, and give you an estimate of what it would of the cost and time to convert those NSFs. If it's over 20, there is a charge associated with that, depending on the number to be analyzed. Because we do have to spend some time going through the NSFs in addition to what the analyzer outputs. And if someone's interested in that as a next step, we can always send you a sample of what the analyzer output looks like. All right, next question. I saw you were using Visual Studio 2010. Are there other versions of Visual Studio that are supported?
Currently, like I said, we're in the process of upgrading, so we will be moving the general project solutions and creations to Visual Studio 2015. Currently, any converted applications can easily be brought into any version of Visual Studio and be dealt with in that version. But currently, for converting, as going through the conversion process, it's Visual Studio 2010. But I said very shortly we'll be on 2015.
Excellent, excellent. Okay. Any other questions? Let's see. Oh, here's one that just came in. Can the apps be deployed on the cloud as a service? The short answer to that is yes. In fact, we've tested this on Azure, and we have a white paper on how to deploy Composer Notes apps into Azure. And now that we're part of OpenText, OpenText has a very rich cloud offering as well. And we'll be looking to that as a possible option as well. All right, any other questions? I'm not seeing, oh, wait a second, here's one. Okay, so the next question is international language supported.
Okay, so any like labels within the design of, say, a form, and any text that was within a certain language, say whether it be French or German or Japanese, all that will come over as is. You do have the option, as one of the options from the first panel in the import wizard, to, in a sense, extract all of that label information as a resource file so that you can take advantage of Visual Studio and .NET's localization abilities. Currently, the runtime itself, as far as system prompts go, it has been localized for Japanese and English as well. We can always generate new localization files for the system prompts and messages, so that, you know, if it needs to be translated to German, then, you know, we could arrange to have that translated to German, and then have that associated localization resource file included as part of the runtime framework.
Excellent. Next question. Does the converted app use standardized style sheets so the look and feel could be easily customized?
Yeah, so the main application, we have a default CSS that we generate, which pretty much addresses all of the design aspects of the various parts of the various controls. We have many CSS classes generated that control all aspects of, say, view grids, form layouts, action buttons, and we also take advantage of ASP.NET skins. So for various controls that we have laid out here within the skin, you know, we're setting default options for those controls, and these can easily be adjusted or even added to at any time, as well as, you know, adding your own custom CSS file to control various custom aspects within any of the actual UI or design layout.
Yeah, and usually as part of the conversion project, you know, we talk a lot about the similar navigation of the app to minimize the impact to the end users, but certainly there's typically a cleanup of the presentation layer that's done, and, you know, there's some very simple things that you can do to really, you know, make sure you're not just bringing over the battleship gray of the Lotus Notes app, you know, over, you know, and make sure it looks like a more modernized UI, you know, without having to do a lot of rework of the application or change it drastically in any way where it's going to impact how the users interact with the app. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions. Let me just double check here on the chat side as well. It looks like that's all the questions we have. If you have one, please post it. Otherwise, what we'll do is we'll wrap up the webinar. Brian and I want to thank everyone for attending. We hope you found this informative and useful. Please provide us your feedback. I believe there's a feedback mechanism when you exit out of the GoToWebinar, and let us know if there were particular things you liked, or there are particular things you would have liked to have seen or expected that you didn't, or if there's potential webinar topics you'd like to see in the future. We'll post the recording of this on the Composer Technologies website. So if you want to view it again at a later time, and that should be available in the next day or two. And with that, we hope you have a good day and hope to talk to you soon. Thank you.